Hello, BookTube. I want to do a Friday Reads for you today, but it's a little all over the map. It's a little bit messy. We're going to go through some books that I have read recently, just a handful of them, and also a handful of books that I want to read that are coming up for one reason or another. And we'll just let it wander all over the place like some sort of natural, amorphous, bookish chat if you were all here for wine and calzones, which I strongly urge you to be. You should all come over for wine and calzones. Last night wouldn't have been good timing. It was pouring rain, and that's not a big problem on its own. It was actually a nice feeling, nice sound to hear it hitting the window panes. But last night also, my little bean, my little baby bean, had diarrhea. First time in her life. And it was regular, and it was pretty insistent all night long. So it wouldn't have been possible then for us to have any fun. But in the future, this is the kind of video that this will be. It will not be a regimented rundown, although I have a lot to show you. So let's go through some things. Well, actually, I have some printed books, some paper and ink books, and also a bunch of stuff to show you on the iPad mini, the greatest piece of technology ever invented. And they're a mixture of stuff that I have read and stuff that I want to read. So let's look at some that I have read recently. Some of these I think have shown up on this channel. One is this, Last Ditch by Stella Mars. This was a hardcover that I found at the Brattle Bookshop. I think I've seen this as a mass market paperback far more often than I've seen it as a hardcover. I don't think I'd ever seen this hardcover before. And it is late in the Inspector Allen series. Stella Mars's main character, kind of reserved, very erudite police inspector, Inspector Allen. It's late in that series, so she has what she's doing down pat. Although it'd be wrong to say that therefore her first Inspector Allen book was awkward. It wasn't. This is just a natural-born storyteller. But it's late enough in the series so that she was probably looking for ways to mix things up herself, as opposed to just doing the same old thing. So she concentrates a large part of this narrative on Allen's son, Ricky, his adult son, Ricky, who is a writer, or wants to be. And that's a risky proposition. That whenever a writer of mysteries with a regular beloved main character wants to do something like that, wants to suddenly say, okay, well, but I want you to like another character. I want most of the narrative to be carried by someone else, not the person you're expecting. I mean, Inspector Allen is all over this book, but his son, Ricky, is over it a lot more. That's a gamble on even an established mystery writer's part, but this is such a great mystery writer. This was just terrific. It's peopled with really well-drawn characters. It has the only weakness that I've ever seen in Stella Mars. I've read a lot of this author's murder mysteries. I haven't read them all, and I haven't reread them all, which I really want to. I have all of them as ebooks, so I'll be devoting time to rereading them. But if I've noticed one weakness, actually two weaknesses. One weakness is less pronounced than the other. Well, the small weakness is that the characters have a tendency to sound the same. But the larger weakness is that it is frightfully easy to pick whodunit. I don't know if the author intended that. Maybe the author had very little intellectual patience with the restrictions of the genre and just said, you know, this is about human nature and human evil. This isn't about some sort of, you know, final quarter of a chess game guessing match. So I'm not going to go out of my way to make the suspect unguessable. I don't know if it was conscious in that way. I knew a murder mystery author once who did have that exact reaction and said, I just don't care. I know that it's a primary reason that people buy a ticket to see the show, but I just don't care about it. And I don't think my readers should care about it either. I always raise my eyebrows a little at that. I don't want you teaching your readers how to be better readers. That's not your place. But in this case, it didn't matter. Much as in the case with, for instance, Elizabeth George, who also spends a huge amount more time on the setting and especially the interior moral landscapes of her characters, as opposed to the traditional elements of a whodunit and a last-minute reveal and all that sort of thing. So I'm not even sure that counts as a weakness. Definitely the characters all sounding the same or similar counts as a weakness, although a minor one. You can still definitely tell who's who. I really, really enjoyed this. I am going to put a plastic dust jacket cover over this and keep the hardcover, even though there's a part of me, I don't know quite why, maybe you're like this, there's a part of me that associates certain book formats with certain kinds of books. I feel like the game is ruined completely by ebooks. All books are the same in ebook. But if I'm looking at a book in a physical format and it's a murder mystery and it's number whatever this is, 16 or 17 or 20 in the series, that feels natural to be a mass market paperback to me, as does most science fiction, especially lowbrow science fiction. It feels natural for it to be a mass market paperback instead of a hardcover. I don't know why that is, but I resist that kind of mental conditioning, even if I'm the one who did the conditioning. I read Death of a Peer by this author in a hardcover that I found dirt cheap up in Vermont, and I have that hardcover in my little book room, and maybe I'll put this one in there too. Certainly this looks nicer. The risk of putting just an unfinished pencil sketch on the cover, it looks nicer than any other version that I remember seeing in bookstores. It just feels a little weird to read a hardcover murder mystery, even though I know perfectly well that once upon a time they came in that form only, before paperbacks were introduced to the mass public with The Lost Horizon. So that was one thing that I read. Really enjoyed it. Like I mentioned in many videos, I love murder mysteries. I love them. I eat them up. So I read them year round. I could not possibly save them for March Mystery Madness. Then the next book, I think we also saw this on this channel. I think I also hauled this from the Brattle. This is by H.J. Jackson, and it's a book about marginalia. And this was absolutely terrific. All the different reasons why people make marginalia. There you have an example on the cover. All the different reasons why they do it. The delicate cases where it is clearly crossing a line into mania or even book destruction. I loved it. Not only because every chapter deals with a different manifestation of marginalia, a different reason why it would be. But these are saturated in history and illusion. So you don't just get the author discussing those different purposes for marginalia, you get a ton of examples from history. And so not only was I reading the chapters and thinking, okay, well, a lot of this applies to me in one way or another. I leave a lot of marginalia in books. And it is, now this book has helped me to see that it is now many different functions of marginalia that I do. Not only that, though, but the chapters just had me jotting down titles and authors and references a mile a minute to go and chase them down, to read more of the people who are quoted. I loved it. Absolutely loved it. It also has a guaranteed place. It also might get a plastic dust jacket, even though it's in perfect condition. It also gets a guaranteed place, not in the little book room, but in the bookcase that I have for books about books and bookish subjects. This goes right on there. How wonderful. I doubt that I could read a better book on marginalia. Then another printed book. This is, I think, yeah, this is the last big printed book that I have, and then we can do all the rest of it on the iPad mini. And this also we have seen recently on this channel. This is the Princeton Guide to Mesozoic Sea Reptiles. This big thing that is illustrated all throughout. Runs down all the different species of gigantic ichthyosaur type sea reptiles that we have. Gives us as much of what we can extrapolate from their skeletons as possible. Keep in mind, these are extrapolations. You will never get a skeleton that complete. It tells us what the habitat was of the animal. So you've got all the different species there listed as if this were a current day nature guide. So you have the habitat, each entry for the animal, most of the entries for the animals mention what we're working with. So not what we've extrapolated and the majority of paleontologists are happy with, but what we actually have. Do we have a skull bone? Do we have 10 skull bones? Do we have metatarsals or whatever? It gives you all of that. And that is not obviously narrative reading. That is just, here we have prototypical turtle type things like that. That is not narrative reading. That is just very interesting. It mainly shows you the incredible variety of these things and the slightly arid nature of bones and skeleton outlines and habitat breakdowns and whatnot is broken up consistently throughout the book with artwork. There's one of these things digging at the seafloor to roust up living organisms or whatnot. And the highlight of the book is the gigantic chunk of prose at the beginning that is all about these animals, all about the study of them, the history of the study of them, what we know of them, how the extrapolations work. You can't do that in individual species breakdowns inside the book. You can't lay out why you're thinking what you think, but you can do it in this long thing. Look at that. Look at that. There you have a megalodon, you have a sperm whale, you have a blue whale. It gives you a relative size of some of these creatures. Very great. And the long prose chunk at the beginning, how long is this? Let's see. Yeah, the prose at the beginning is almost 100 pages. And that was the highlight for me. That was I could have taken 300 pages of that easily. Although I love the illustrations and I love imagining, flipping through these pages and imagining the millions of years that these things lived and were in the oceans, and what drama they must have gone through. Hurricanes, meteor impacts, they must have fought with each other and fought maybe with creatures on land, caught creatures on land that were basking in the shallows or whatnot. How many dramas that we will never know. I think it's fascinating, absolutely fascinating. I was conjuring with it mentally the whole time I was flipping through it. And that 70-page Pressy at the beginning is sort of a thumbprint of what the discipline knows right now. So, in 10 years there'll be another Mesozoic sea reptiles book, and that chapter will be ancient history. There'll be new updates to that. But it definitely scratched my itch for dinosaur stuff. And then we move on to the iPad mini, the greatest piece of technology ever conceived by the mind of man. This is the newer iPad mini that I got. I have a first generation iPad mini that is still a wonderful machine, but it's slightly heavier and it is weaker and slower. It isn't updated by Apple anymore, and it isn't accessible. Not just Apple, a lot of the stuff that you might want to load onto it doesn't work on a device like that anymore. And worst of all, I don't need it for much, but the worst limitation of all is that it's incredibly weak in picking up Wi-Fi. It has to be basically on top of the modem or it won't pick up the Wi-Fi. So when I lay back on my pillows at night to read, I am too far away from the modem for it to do anything except read what I already have on it, which is great. I have on that older iPad mini, I have, I think, 1,000 books. So there's plenty to read on there, but this thing is fully functional. And I can only imagine, actually I don't have to just imagine, I've had several of you tell me, this is, I think, the iPad mini 4. I'm pretty sure that that's what this is. But I've had some of you sing the praises of the new iPad mini 6 that is apparently unbelievable. Is as far advanced from this thing as this thing is from the first generation. It's very tempting. It's very tempting to hear. But anyway, enough about the device. Let's look at the books. These are a mixture of things that I have read and also things that I haven't read and want to read. And sometimes those two are one and the same. Like, for instance, if there is a reprint of something that I have read many times. Like, for instance, Saga Press, as I've shown you on a few occasions, is reprinting the entire Elric saga of Michael Moorcock. This is the Citadel Forgotten Myths, which is inserted. It's a later inserted adventure between two earlier novels. It represents a change in Moorcock's prose. This is an author who is actually paying his readers the implicit compliment of not trying to ape his earlier style when writing later Elric books. And these Saga Press reprints of all of these are fantastic. Well worth, in fact, I don't have them. I don't have a pile of books here because I'm not going to lug things with the bean feeling poorly. But these hardcovers are if you're a Michael Moorcock or an Elric fan, they're well worth you getting. They are going to be a very beautiful set when they're all done. And it's always great to revisit Elric. Then we have, next we have something, this I haven't read. It comes out in November. In a very real sense, it probably hasn't been fully written yet. And it's going to have 1 million editions. And we've been through this many times before. This is a case where I feel like I have to read this. Not just because my bailiwick, the bailiwick that I've set for myself in reading, we all do it. Mine is the major new releases in the American book market in the genres that I'm interested in. That would be reason enough for me to read this next one. But also, there's a broader imperative for me, which is that I am alive in this time period. And I do not at all believe in sticking my head in the sand and ignoring the history of my time. We are living through history. All of us are. And it might be more comforting to partially stick your head in the sand and just say, well, I can't affect it all. It doesn't involve me directly. So all it does is upset me, so I'm just not going to pay attention to it. That might be more comforting, but I cannot make myself do that. So the next book on the list here is the January 6th report from the January 6th committee in Congress. This edition, you can barely make it out there. This edition, I forget who publishes it, but it has a foreword by Ari Melber, the really, really dumb cable news head. If you have trouble keeping them apart, he's the one who likes to sententiously quote rap lyrics. And he'll do it in the middle of a multi-person panel discussion about police brutality or a little kid getting shot in the head. And you can see his guests just freeze up because they're on his show, so they don't want to say anything about how unbelievably horrible and awkward a combination it is of stupid and cringe-inducing to have a grown man do this. And he does it all the time. He thinks it's cool. He thinks it's a signature of his. It's laughable. It's Ted Baxter level laughable, and he is on top of that a moron. So I won't get the January 6th report edition that has his forward. I'll look to find one with a forward that I can stand. Much like with the Mueller report, there'll be many versions of this. The report itself is actually your property if you're an American. You can download the whole thing. The thing that will make each one of these commercially viable will be the person who gets to write the forward, maybe annotations, if a publisher goes to that much bother to do this. But it's a public document. The January 6th report itself is a public document, and this will be the final report of the committee, the select committee, to investigate the events of January 6th, when a sitting U.S. president organized, orchestrated, and then directly incited a violent insurrection to overthrow the capital of my country, execute his vice president, and install himself as an unelected leader of this country, presumably for the rest of his life, by dispensing with an election. I don't like the way the election came out, and I have an armed mob at my disposal, and I know where the senators are. I know where the Congress is assembled to certify the vote. I will march the mob to them and physically stop them from doing it. In other words, a coup attempt. There's no way to beat around the bush about that. That's exactly what it was. Talk about living through history. It's always seemed a little bit odd and Pyrrhic to me that the January 6th committee, assembled and very seriously, very portentously made its pronouncements and had its hearings and assembled its witnesses and its facts and its evidence and whatnot, when the whole world watched that happen. I had friends all over the world emailing and texting and voxering me saying, oh my God, there's a coup happening in your country. The president of your country is trying to stay in power illegally in the United States of America. I had quite a few people in some parts of the world, especially old cronies of mine from long decades and decades ago. I had quite a few of those emailing me and saying, well, now you know how other countries feel when the CIA does this to them. Only this is you. But in none of those cases, none of those people across 5 different decades of life, none of those people were looking at those events and having any doubt as to what they were. So in one sense, the endeavor of the January 6th committee seemed to me always to be a little bit histrionic, a little bit of posturing. I would extend that to a gesture that they made yesterday that will not be in this edition or any other edition. That's what I mean. This isn't quite finished being written. The January 6th committee had a televised meeting yesterday in which they voted unanimously to subpoena Donald Trump to appear before them and give testimony. I would say the same thing about that. That is needless posturing. That is mostly histrionics. He won't do it. He said that he would, but he won't. He won't do it. And if he did, he would either take the Fifth Amendment the whole time, or he would lie the whole time. Now, I am of the opinion, it's a minority opinion, but I can read these documents as well as anybody else and come to my own conclusions. I think that if you have been a chief executive of the United States government, you do not have a Fifth Amendment right. You do not have Fifth Amendment protection anymore. I could be wrong about that. I think that I could make a reading that would stand up to pretty good argument on that lines. But he'll do it anyway. If he's fool enough to show up at all, he'll do it anyway. If he is baited, he thinks that everybody is his enemy. So if he's baited into talking on the stand, he will lie. It will be perjury in real time. He will have to swear to tell the truth. He'll have to take an oath before he gives testimony in front of the committee, and everything he says will be a lie. That's perjury. That would get you or me thrown in jail until the sun grew cold. But it won't happen to him. I myself don't think that he will do it. He will ignore the subpoena, first of all. He'll ignore the legal penalties that come with ignoring a subpoena from Congress. Others of his minions have learned to their great cost that that isn't something you can just sneeze off. But with him, it is. Because when we say that in America no one is above the law, the asterisk, the addendum in that is except Donald Trump. Donald Trump has been above the law for 70 years. And will continue to be above the law until he dies of natural causes in 2047 in his bed in the residence of the White House. So making a very super serious gesture on live TV that you are now issuing a subpoena that the former president come before you and give testimony, that isn't going to be in this volume or any. I'll pick the January 6th volume that I want, but you see what I mean. The January 6th committee might even have another televised meeting. I mean, if in a wild fantasy scenario, if Donald Trump says to his lawyers, "To hell with you, I've got nothing to hide. I want the American people to hear my response." It seems like that's what's on his mind, because his one condition, you don't make conditions to Congress, but I guess if you're Donald Trump, you can. His one condition was that his testimony has to be live. And that testimony sounds like the sort of thing that this megalomaniac would say if he actually was considering doing it in a fantasy world in which he did show up for the January 6th committee and give them fraudulent testimony. There would have to be more January 6th meetings in public. Of course there would be. So I don't know if this book will come out, but if we do get a raft of January 6th volumes in later October or November or whenever, I will certainly read them. They are certainly on my TBR. One of them is. I'll pick the one I want. I don't think I can read it more than once. I remember the experience of slogging through the Mueller report. It was horrifying. Just horrifying. Reading it page after page after page. Parts of it very well written. Parts of it were very dramatic. And there were federal offenses committed by the sitting president on almost every page. And it was heartbreaking because by then Donald Trump's pet Attorney General had already gone on television and lied to the American public, said this exonerates him. There's nothing here at all. It's full of here. It's full of that. That was just a lie. I imagine that the January 6th report will be, if anything, even worse, considering what's coming. Considering the fact that you and I are going to live to see every single one of the people on that bench at the January 6th committee either in jail or publicly executed. So it's going to be a bittersweet thing to read, but I'll read it anyway because it's history. But some history is easier to read than others. Like, for instance, Loeb Classical Library editions are history that stays history. There are no R.E. Melber forwards for a Loeb Classical Library edition. They are, for those of you who might not be familiar with them, they're cute little hardcover editions that Harvard University Press has been putting out for a century of classical works, where you get the original language, either Greek or Latin on one side, and a good enough English translation on the other that is meant to be very corresponding to the original language. None of the usual art of a translator. It's meant to be almost interlinear in translation. And the Loeb volumes are great. They are terrific, especially since, as you could tell from that description, quite a few of them will exist only as a Loeb Classical Library edition. There won't be any popular edition of some of their authors, quite a few of their authors. That is certainly the case with this book. This is a forthcoming Loeb Classical Library edition in the Latin side of the Latin books are all in red, the Greek books are all in green. This is a Latin one. It's fragmentary prose from the Republican era of Rome. So we have, I don't know if you can read it there, Livius Andronicus, Naevius, and Caecilius. And these three all wrote an enormous amount of works. And we have only fragments, tiny, tiny fragments of them, and as much research as can be done. So in this case, as with the Mesozoic sea reptiles, a large part of the fun of this volume for me will be the forward and the introduction, the critical stuff at the back. The fragments themselves Nevius is very interesting, but the fragments themselves there won't be much of them there to really consider on their own. It'll be more the critical apparatus on this thing. Can't wait, though, even so. Let's see here. Okay, this next one I've mentioned many times. Sorry about this. I've mentioned many times on this channel that in the 21st century there are extremely loud and coercive voices. If we do a simplistic personal, moral, or political spectrum, if we do it just as a straight line spectrum, there are very loud and very coercive, insane, radical voices on the far left of that spectrum. And there are an equal number of those voices on the far right. And we're all in the middle. Normal people are all in the middle. And unfortunately, both ends of those spectrum produce books. So I have to read the January 6th Commission report, and I also am going to read this. This is by Andrew Doyle, and it is The New Puritans, How the Religion of Social Justice Captured the Western World. And you might be scratching your head thinking, well, isn't social justice a good thing? And of course you're right. It is a good thing. Social justice itself is a good thing. But I think you've probably encountered what this author is talking about. Certainly we've talked about this new puritanical censorship on this channel many, many times. Social justice is a good thing. All of us who say, no matter what you are, no matter who you are, you should have fair and equal treatment under the law. You shouldn't be the subject of official or sanctioned bigotry of any kind. You should be free to have your own personal dignity. You should be free to have that because it's a free country, because that's the world we'd like to live in. That, the lowercase s and the lowercase j, that social justice, we all believe in. We all want that to be true. A lot of us give time and energy, sometimes even money, to make that happen. But that's not the kind of social justice this book is talking about. This book is talking about SJWs, social justice warriors. It's talking about the punitive, loud, radical, coercive group at the end of the spectrum talking about those things. And they are really bad. They don't have the tanks. They don't have the tacit approval of the Secret Service or the military. They're still really bad. They still want to coerce you, and they still want to hurt you if you don't repeat what they say. Fascism is the same on either end of the spectrum. The worth or not of this book will be entirely determined by whether or not Andrew Doyle is on one end of the spectrum or the other. I would love to read a book like this written by a normal person who's just looking at the excesses, looking at professionals, especially in academia, who have been peremptorily fired for refusing to cant a new religion, which is what this book is. This book is calling the SJW, or social justice pursuits, a new religion. Some of you may have seen John McWhorter's book about the religion of social progressivism or whatever. He also characterizes it as a religion with a high text and priests and the necessity of believing on faith because there is no real world grounding for a lot of the claims, and excommunication and religious wars, censorship, an index of banned books. He makes a very compelling case, I think, for how this thing really does check all the boxes of a standard repressive religion. I don't know what Andrew Doyle is, though. John McWhorter is a normal person. He is a normal person. I have no idea if Andrew Doyle will actually sustain any kind of argument in here, or will he just say, well, the pronouncements from either end of this spectrum are every bit as hair-raisingly awful. I mean, it's no different to me whether Andrew Doyle says the 2020 election was stolen, or Andrew Doyle says they're making you say pronouns and you would have to go on a hunger strike. It doesn't matter to me one way or the other which thing is being said. We'll have to see. If he writes it as a normal person, I'll be interested in reading it. This next one is big, and I am very much looking forward to it. I haven't got to it yet. This will be a new read for me, even though I read all about it when it was getting critical reactions in the UK. It's coming out in December in the US. This is A Private Spy, the collected letters of John le Carré. Really nice cover. Hoping they go with that. This is edited. I don't know if you can make it out there. I can't make it out either. I can't quite make out the name of the editor, but the reviews that this got in the UK really excited my interest to read it. I like letter collections anyway. I think they're fascinating. A lot of times they will sink or swim with me depending on the critical apparatus and how it's done. Sometimes they're done in mind-bogglingly dumb ways. If you're doing a letters collection, I think this is almost 1,000 pages long. If you're doing a huge letter collection, you want all of the helpful information. A letter mentions somebody named Tim. A letter mentions, Sewell's latest book or whatever. You want the clarifications, the one line, don't go on at great length. You want the one line clarification of who those things are at the bottom of that page. You don't want endnotes in a letters collection. You are reading along as you go. And yet I've read so many letters collections where they make figuring out what the person's talking about a major struggle. I don't know that about this book. I don't know how this is put together. We shall see. Then this next one is it'll be a sentimental read. This is going to be expensive. It's a new book, but I'm going to buy a copy on my own. I'm not going to go hat in hand, Houghton Mifflin for this thing. I'm going to buy a copy on my own. It's a new special deluxe edition of The Lord of the Rings. And I use this picture so that you can see what's deluxe about it. It has the die cut out in the cardboard box, so that when you slide the book all the way in, you get the eye of Sauron peering out at you from there. It's red leather bound. It's got sewn binding. It's probably got one of those cloth bookmarks. And it's a one-volume Lord of the Rings, which, believe it or not, I just discovered I do not currently own. I do not currently have a one-volume Lord of the Rings. And this will be partly a solidarity read, a sympathy read, maybe even a little bit of irritation read for me. The reason that I'll buy it with my own money is because I just watched the first season, the finale of The Lord of the Rings, The Rings of Power, and which my predictions all came true. I predicted exactly what Sauron was going to be. I predicted exactly what they were going to do with him and with Galadriel. And I was right about all of it, and it is stomach-churningly awful. It is nothing short of a poop-smearing vandalization of this work. It's not a creative team coming in and having a kind of idea to look at things in a different way. It's not that at all. It's a vandalization of this work. It's The Lady of the Rings, is what it is. It's the Rings of Power and its first season pray to Eru Ilúvatar that we never see a second season, although we will. Amazon will double down. They're making up their own ratings. They're making up their own revenue streams, and they cannot fail. They cannot let this series fail. To them, it's them versus the Nazis. So they cannot stop it. They can't. The best thing for them to do would be to say, well, all right, the first season, aside from the people that we paid to praise it, everyone hated it. So especially the Tolkien fans hated it. We're not going to change course. So let's just let it die. We won't do any other seasons. I don't think they're going to do that. Certainly the same people who did the same story for Star Trek Discovery did not stop. Star Trek Discovery is coming back for more seasons. The Rings of Power revealed itself in its final episode to be The Force Awakens. It's The Last Jedi. The choice at the end of the final episode is the choice that Kylo Ren gives to Rey. Rule with me, and we'll be evil together. It's the exact same thing, with just the names changed. But it does far more violence than that. I know that Star Wars is really, really beloved by a lot of people, but not to the extent that this book is. And the contentions being made by the Rings of Power in its final episode, the motivations of the main character, the title character of The Lord of the Rings, it's mind-staggeringly desecrating. It's just, the thing that struck me about The Rings of Power for its first 7 episodes was how poorly it's done. Aside from a few visuals that could have been done with matte painting in the 70s, it looks ugly. And the writing is absolutely awful. You keep expecting characters who aren't speaking the lines at the moment to be snickering in the background because of how awful the writing is. I was concentrating on that the whole time and trying not to think about the desecration that this whole show is to Tolkien. It was impossible to avoid that in the final episode. It was impossible not to see it. And that made me think what I did with Star Trek Discovery and most infamously Ghostbusters 2016 and all the other desecrations that have happened here, from the comic books to Terminator to Star Wars, to Star Trek. In every single instance that happened, I thought, well, I can always go back to the originals. I can go back to the original source material here that wasn't before it was desecrated. And for this show, for Rings of Power, that's Lord of the Rings. And I don't have a one volume, so I'm going to get this, even though it's a little fancy for my blood. A number of people, Mark Richardson included, can tell you I'm pretty rough on box sets, but I like them all the same because they don't take up shelf space. They are their own shelf. They hold their shape. So I'm going to get this. I'm going to spend money on it. is the long and the short of it. And this next one, I'm not going to show you the advanced copy because my advanced copy is in terrible shape and has a sticker on it. So I'll just show you this. This is Stella Mars by Cormac McCarthy, who has 2 books coming out almost back to back this autumn. The Passenger and Stella Mars. And they look the same. Rumor has it that many book section editors are being told that they must be reviewed together. It is a terrible, I don't know if that's true, but it's a terrible sign if a publisher is issuing demands to book reviewers. That is a terrible sign. I have already read this. I got it months ago and could not resist the urge to read this and its companion book. But I'm going to give it a reread closer to the date when I will attempt to write about it. I'll attempt to talk about it. And we'll see how that goes. This next one is something we've seen on this channel. This is The Wasteland by Matthew Hollis. It is a biography of T.S. Eliot's The Wasteland, which has an anniversary this year. The Wasteland is a poem that I've never really liked, and treatments like this, studies of the book and its nuances and its publication history and all, have never really helped me to like it in ways that I wish they could. Even Dennis Donoghue has not helped me to like this author as much as I am told I should. I love reading this author's letters. I love reading about this author. Robert Crawford's, the second volume of his biography of Eliot is fantastic. It's one of the best biographies that came out this year. Haven't read this yet. I got the advanced copy. I probably won't read it until I get the finished copy. I'm hoping that it does what all of these books want to do for me and never manage to do. Then this next one is a reread. I have a picture of the cover here, but I have the enormous printed book, which originally snagged my mind because of Doorstopper Doom, the booktube event, a new booktube event where you are urged, maybe quixotically, to read those huge books that are on your shelf. Take them down and actually read them. I was looking at my shelves and I noticed this thing because it's enormous. It's like 1,200 pages long. I loved it. I've praised it on this channel many times in the past when I did library tours. And I thought, well, that would be a perfect candidate for Doorstopper Doom. Maybe, but maybe not. I'm sort of locked in with Doorstopper Doom to reading novels. This is a work of nonfiction. So I told myself, well, I'll pull it down and just read a bit. I was sucked right in. It is just so good. It is a gigantic undertaking, but it is a fantastic book for if you are interested in books about books or books about reading. It is by Philip Waller, and it is Writers, Readers, and Reputations. And it's all about the long 18th century. Writing in the long 18th century. Really, almost 300 years of literary history is here. Everybody walks through these pages. All kinds of anecdotes about who wrote what and why and for what money and under what conditions and with what circumstances of acceptance or rejection and to what bookstores, which lending libraries and why and what money was involved, and then all the way out to who read these things. Who read them and why did they read them? That's the reputations part. My own profession of the book review trade is liberally represented in this book. How did the public learn about the books that the authors of the time were writing? And what did they learn about them when they learned about them? Did they see ads? Did they read reviews? What reached them? What caused them to put their money down for books or to go to a library and put their name down? Oftentimes in the span of time covered by this book, your library cost money. There were dues every year that you had to pay for their operating budget. It's endless. It's just an endless book. It's enormous. I don't have the physical copy is over by the chair where I was reading it. I don't have it here. It's a big, thick thing. It's like 11 or 1,200 pages long. It definitely fits for Doorstopper Doom, but it was a Doorstopper ninja attack. I thought I had a whole bunch of ideas for Doorstopper Doom for the books I was going to read. This one just sucked me in. I thought I'd just read the introduction. The introduction is long and wonderful before the book that gets down to cases and actual time periods and segments of what they're talking about, whether it's printing or distribution or copyright, the birth of copyright law. I thought just read the introduction. That's good enough, and it sucked me right in. So I spent a couple of days rereading this thing. I'm going to try to move back to narrative fiction for the rest of Doorstopper Doom. As far as I'm concerned, Doorstopper Doom really goes year round. I have huge books coming my way, and oh my! Just the other day, I got the catalog for. I got a couple of publishers' catalogs for spring of 2023. A couple of huge books there too. I read them with a kind of disjointed bemusement because the 2023 is not real for me. It won't be real for me until I return, until I rematerialize in the year 2023. So I'm looking at these books and thinking, well, who knows if I'll even want to read them? Who knows if I'll want to read anything? Who knows if I'll be reviewing anything in 2023? I don't. Still, seeing those catalogs really, it always has an effect on me because I look at all of those offerings and I think, boy, oh boy, these catalogs were coming out before you were born. Probably they will be going out to bookish people and editors and readers after you're dead. How wonderful to see the riches of a new season all laid out for you. Very apropos to this book, which talks all about how you hype your books and to whom, how much money you're willing to put on that. Just incredible. So that was the last thing that I wanted to show you for this admittedly rambling Friday reads. And the last thing was a Doorstopper Doom volume that I wasn't expecting. It wasn't part of my plan, even my TBR for Doorstopper Doom. It just happened. I like that. That really pleases me. Nice to know that these print and paper books on my shelves can actually do that from time to time. But anyway, this video's gone on way too long, so I'm gonna wrap up. This is my Friday reads. I of course am curious, as always, with Friday reads, what you're reading today and for the weekend, or what you read this week. Is there anything that really stood out? I'm tomorrow night. I will be looking back at my week and looking at what really stood out. That Wycliffe murder mystery really made me want to read more Wycliffe murder mysteries. That's one thing that sticks out, but there were others. Feel free to sing out. I would love to hear all of that. That's the kind of nosy questions I'd be asking if you really were over here on Friday, every Friday, for Friday reads and wine and calzones. But you're not. So I'm going to wrap this up for now. This has gone on way too long, and I'm losing the light. So that's bad. I mean, when you're talking about Cormac McCarthy, we got to carry the light. We can't lose the light. But I will wrap this up, but I will be back. Thank you, BookTube.